global summit in the mountains has turned into something far from the usual diplomatic routine. Before Air Force One even landed, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney made a dramatic move. He scrapped the traditional G7 communique, declined the customary group photo, and sent a message, loud and clear. This wasn't diplomacy as usual. It was a warning. President Trump arrived with a set of steep demands: 5% of GDP toward defense from each ally, new tariffs, and even suggested annexing. In response, French President Emmanuel Macron rerouted to Greenland ahead of the summit to rebuke Trump's ongoing interest in purchasing the territory. Japan filed complaints with the World Trade Organization, while Mexico came prepared with legal defenses. Behind the scenes, fingers were pointing at the US for shaking the foundations of the global economy. This gathering was meant to reaffirm G7 unity, but what unfolded in Alberta looked more like the unraveling of the institution itself. In a shocking first since 1975, Carney eliminated the G7's joint statement before discussions began. According to Reuters, the move surprised both Washington and Europe, stripping the summit of its usual consensus document. And his aides told Bloomberg this wasn't spontaneous. It was a strategic refusal to endorse what they called U.S. trade bullying, following Trump's imposition of a blanket 10% tariff impacting over $1 billion, 0 cents, in imports from allies. Rather than a joint declaration, Carney released a neutral chair summary, devoid of commitment or consensus. Macron's office labeled the decision without precedent, while a German official characterized it as a tactical silence rather than disarray. Trump departed without a single signed document to back his agenda. The bigger issue now: did Carney just rewrite the rules of resistance within G7 diplomacy? In a March 2025 Ohio rally, Trump declared that Canada should have always been part of the US, igniting outrage in Ottawa and condemnation from former Canadian defense leaders. But his comments weren't just rhetoric. The US ran a $38 billion, $600 million 0 cents trade deficit with Canada in 2024, and Trump responded with sector-specific tariffs: 22% on dairy, 10% on aluminium, and 14% on lumber. According to Bloomberg, these measures have cost Canadian manufacturers $4.2 billion 0 cents just in Q1 of 2025. Carney's negotiators have been in quiet talks with US officials to shield exports of critical minerals and clean technology, both now facing barriers under Washington's new economic sovereignty clauses. Former WTO official Peter Clark summed it up to the Financial Post: "This isn't a trade dispute, it's a sovereignty standoff dressed up in tariff jargon." Macron's sudden detour to Greenland just before the summit wasn't incidental. It was a clear jab at Trump, who recently revived his proposal to purchase the island in a Fox News interview. Standing beside Denmark's PM, Macron declared, "Greenland is not a bargaining chip." The visit came as the US pushed for new Arctic drilling and urged military expansion under NORAD. The EU quietly supported Macron's move to shape the narrative before Trump could. Now, Trump is playing defense at what's supposed to be his stage. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz landed under pressure to explain a €17 billion 500 million 0 cents export loss to the US due to tariffs, automobiles taking the brunt. Japan's Shigeru Ishiba faces scrutiny over Tokyo's massive trade surplus as the US threatens renewed investigations into steel imports. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer secured a limited digital trade exemption, but it excludes the crucial financial services sector. Mexico's President Sheinbaum entered talks amid border policy uncertainty, and India's Modi showed up while facing backlash over alleged political violence linked to a plot in Toronto. None of these leaders came to build bridges. They came to shield themselves from fallout. Carney's rejection of the final communique denied Trump a chance to claim victory. The World Bank's June 2025 report downgraded global GDP growth by 0.7%, citing the ripple effects of U.S. trade volatility. Canada has already lost $4 billion, $200 million 0 cents in retaliatory damages this year, largely in nickel, beef and softwood exports. By refusing a final declaration, Carney ensured Trump couldn't exploit the summit diplomatically. Trump's 5% defense spending demand met stiff opposition. Carney countered, Canada won't let its military policy be dictated by budget percentages. According to Max Bergman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Carney didn't just mute the message, he set the tone, the backdrop and the framing. Trump left with no photo ops, no fanfare and no wins. The remote Canadian Rockies were chosen for security, but that isolation now looks intentional. Roads were closed, protesters pushed far out, and the RCMP locked the area down, reminiscent of the 2002 G8. This wasn't just about protecting leaders, it was about controlling the stage. The AP reported that every G7 member except the UK is now under US tariffs. EU officials said the summit was meant to avoid a crisis, yet it appears to have created one. A Canadian insider told Bloomberg, "We didn't need headlines, we built the frame." And the silence, that was planned. Beneath the surface, something deeper is shifting. US trade policy isn't just erratic, it's eroding the global rules-based system. Max Bergman called it out. The G7 was designed to coordinate. Now the US is the destabilizer. Since Trump's second term began, Washington has slapped tariffs on $1,300 billion 0 cents in goods and axed 6 bilateral deals within 3 months. Global capital flows fell 12.4% in Q1 2025, the worst since early COVID, with US unpredictability topping the blame list. At this summit, Trump didn't defend those numbers, he dodged them. His team emphasized NATO obligations and sovereignty, leaving economists to unpack the damage. And without a unifying statement, each nation is walking its own path. France, Germany and Italy now rely on an EU-wide tariff defense system that triggers automatic retaliation. The moment Trump floated a 17% tariff on EU machinery, the system kicked in. Japan called for emergency WTO arbitration. Mexico arrived with legal defenses in hand, and India's attendance, under a shadow of controversy, only added tension. A former Canadian G7 negotiator told the Globe and Mail, "This wasn't a summit, it was crisis triage. What began as an alliance has turned into a defensive huddle, each country fending off the one across the table." The G7 was created to foster unity after economic shocks. Now, it's looking more like a relic, symbolic but empty. Carney's decision to skip the communique wasn't just protest, it was a shift. AFP reports that many G7 diplomats now refer to the summit as an outdated formality. If no one signs the final message and the host refuses to lead, what remains? And perhaps that's the point. This wasn't the dramatic end, it was the opening act. Carney's silent pushback might mark the beginning of a new diplomatic era. But with NATO up next and Trump expected to double down on demands, the real battles could still be ahead. So don't look away. The next summit could redraw alliances entirely.